Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions.
Hi Freya.
Hello.
Welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thank you.
Who are you and what do you do?
So I'm Freya, believe it or not. I own a PR and marketing agency now. So I kind of wanted to own and run a company, but I kind of never really envisioned it happening whilst I'm quite so young. But yeah, it's kind of evolved like that. I really enjoy PR and media. That's what I've done for a few years now. And yeah, when the opportunity came up to go freelance, I took it. And as a result, I've been able to work with a much broader range of clients, which has been certainly interesting.
Nice. I'm only asking this question because you took us there. How young are you after declaring that you're so young?
No, that's fine. So I'm 20, which is absolutely crazy because when I went into an office the other day and I was like, oh my God, I've actually never been in an office before. Like there was a canteen and we had to like have lunch together. It was absolutely crazy. I just hadn't imagined this. And like the desks were in cubicles, which is just wild because I obviously entered the world of work post-COVID. In COVID, I was doing my A-levels. So it was really entirely different. And I think that also shaped my kind of perception of not wanting to go into the world of work following COVID. And I didn't want to go to university either because studying online had been such a challenge when the world wasn't used to it yet. So yeah, that definitely influenced my decision, which somehow ended up here.
Nice. We're a really interesting point in terms of that sort of working pattern. So we've got like 3 generations of people, I think. Those that only ever worked in offices, so coming towards the end of their career. My kind of generation that spent a chunk of the sort of 5 to 10 years in offices, now in a COVID world. And certainly what we're seeing from our interns and early career professionals is what even is an office. And where that's difficult is you've got a board who thinks the way and senior managers who think the way to progress in career is everyone in an office, get back in because you've got to do it. And a workforce that's like, why? Everything else works when we're at home.
Yeah, completely. My cousins are at university and I'm like, well, why don't you come and stay with me and then we can have really good fun time outside of your lectures and you can just do your lectures online. And they're like, no, we have to do our lectures in person. I'm like, why? It's not like they have to do collaborative work that they can't do online. But for some reason, that's just an example of where they're being forced into a physical location for, in my opinion, no apparent reason. But yeah, I don't know. There's certainly a lot of nuance, particularly because, as you say, but from the flip side, like my bosses are like, oh, Freya, you have to be at a desk the whole time. Like the other day, I wanted to go up to London in the last hour of work. And my boss was like, Freya, you can't work on a train. You're not in an office. You have to be in an office or you have to take the afternoon off. And I was like, oh, it's okay, I'll take the afternoon off. But yeah, it was unusual. Like I consider an office to be anywhere where my laptop, well, maybe a phone, but definitely a laptop and some connectivity. That's an office for me, but not for everyone.
Nice. The other bit we spoke about before the camera started rolling was the amount of sort of societal or self-imposed rules that you find yourself operating by.
Yeah, it's
Unpick
wild.
that a
I
bit.
don't really know where they've come from for me because I have had such a limited experience in the world of work. And generally, right now I'm working with an organisation that's a bit more hierarchical, but my previous roles have been very much like the company owner and me, or like a flat management structure in which I think that hierarchy is also massively different and therefore like the rules and expectations are quite different. But I don't know why I've somehow like thrust upon myself this idea that I've got to be like really quiet and polite and like, oh yes, how can I help with this? And never really disagree. And I don't really know where it's come from, whether it's like gender or age or like lack of experience related. But I also can't imagine that. I'm sure there are many benefits to university. I'm not trying to criticise it. I realise it's probably coming across like that. But maybe that's one of those things that I would have gained from university. Like perhaps that's where you're taught to challenge other people in a much better way. I don't know.
Not in my experience.
No?
I was a car crash of a person throughout university.
I imagine I would have been. That was why I didn't bother. I was like, oh, I don't need to waste like 50 grand being a disaster. I can do that anyway.
Yeah, I spent eight years there, a degree into PhD, and it was only towards the end and meeting my wife who started to make me a plausible person. So it took a long time. And you've clearly got there much faster.
I don't know. I think it's only because I was so keen to leave home. And so that meant being independent and not being supported by like family. And I think that forced me to have to act a bit more grown up and pay the bills. But Yeah, no, it's certainly been a journey. Like I really didn't plan to do anything meaningful or bigger picture for so long. I really just wanted to be happy and focus on my own stuff and go travel the world and, you know, ride horses all day. And then I realised that the world's a much bigger place and maybe I should do something.
Okay, so talk to us about the genesis of the company and how you decided to found your own company.
Yeah, so I guess this goes back to Portugal again. So exactly post-COVID, I ran away from the southeast where I'd grown up my whole life, and I ran away to the west coast of Wales, where I had a really fun summer doing absolutely nothing impactful and just having a great time. I was always up a mountain or in the sea or, you know, paddleboarding along the river or whatever, and it was great. And then immediately following that, I was an intern for a really good horse trainer in Portugal. So I was training horses on these beautiful hills in Portugal the whole time, still had no real responsibilities. It was amazing, wasn't even paying car insurance. And I was so pleased with myself that I'd cancelled my car insurance when I moved to Portugal. It'd been like £80 a month before I went to Portugal. And when I came back and got car insurance again, it like doubled because that was when the oil thing happened those few years ago. Anyway, so false economy, cancelling car insurance. But anyhow, so I was in Portugal and I was riding across these beautiful hills in Alentejo, but I don't know how well you know Portugal. But it's kind of all for cork farming, like cork, like wine or like shoes or whatever. So you can see for miles and miles and miles, like incredible visibility and these beautiful rolling hills, but they're all the exact same shade of green. Like there's nothing different. And so I'd ride for hours and hours and hours. I'd take all these ponies like off for a day into the mountains and just explore. And I wouldn't see anyone, which was great. But I realised I wasn't hearing anything either. Like nothing was living in those forests. So I got home one day from a ride and I was like, right, this lack of biodiversity is awful. I'm going to do something about this. And so I was like, right, okay, I think conservation is the answer. So I did lots of research into how to get into conservation as like early in your career. And it appeared that the kind of two main answers were either to do some kind of internship or to do an ecology degree or like maybe zoology. So I was looking at both of these. And the internships are all with like turtles in Malaysia or like elephants in Bali or something, which is great. Like, that's nice, let's save those. But obviously now I know there's a lot more to conservation than just elephants and turtles. And also the problem with those internships, which I think is also kind of reflected throughout the environment sector, is that they all cost you money. Maybe some of the ones in the UK don't necessarily cost you so much money, but they cost you a lot of time. Often volunteers are expected to do stuff for free in pursuit of conservation, which is absolutely crazy. So I was like, right, okay, well that's not an option because, as I said, I wanted to be independent and not supported by anyone. So that was out.
That's one of the reasons why it was so important to us that the OC internship program was paid and was, even from start to finish, was advertised as a job with a specific job description or a broad area that someone could craft their own in, and it was paid and it led to a genuine employment opportunity or as a springboard. So, and you are right, when I first started in the sector, I did do volunteer placements and stuff, and I still reflect, was that right or wrong? I certainly came from a really modest family background and had to work other jobs to pay to do it. Was that hard and unpleasant? Yes. Would I be where I am now without it? Probably not. So it's people have to make their own choices. I hope through our work and your business and the people who are starting things in the environment sector, that the next generation, yours and the one after, won't have to make those choices. There will be paid internships and opportunities to do it.
I hope so. And I think there's so much nuance that comes from like the other variety of disadvantages that people come from, like their backgrounds. So yeah, certainly a problem. But anyway, so I wasn't going to do that. And then an ecology degree didn't actually sound that fun to me, to be honest. I quite like science, but the whole principle of university, I struggled to see the appeal at the time, and unfortunately I still do. But
You say unfortunately still do. Are you carrying some guilt about that?
I carry a huge amount of guilt.
Specifically about uni, we can pick up the other stuff later.
Specifically about uni. Because I think like throughout school I was always like the, top of the class and like excellent at whatever, and everyone, teacher's pet, all of that. And then suddenly I was like, I don't want to go to university. I'd been like prime candidate for like Oxbridge, and all the teachers were so unhappy that I didn't want to go. And they kept trying to force me to do these like career path things. And like they were like, you have to go to university, Freya. What are you going to do if you don't? And I was like, I'm going to be free. Like I'm going to have no debt. I'm going to be able to go wherever I want. And they were like, no. And I remember, oh my gosh, I remember in sixth form, I was like 16. It must have been a few weeks before lockdown happened. And they were making absolutely everyone in the entire year do this like university application. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to do it because I'm definitely not going, even though it's like, you know, a year and a half, 2 years away. They're like, no, Freya, you really ought to do it. Like, it, you know, you might change your mind, but you also, it's really valuable. And I was like, yeah, that's fine, but I've actually made this decision. And it's not that I'm ruling it out long term. I certainly would consider it later down the line if I wanted to be a doctor or something. But I was just like, oh yeah, for now, it's just not for me. I'd rather travel. Like I'd already gone to Scotland, Berlin, Nepal, all on my own. So I really felt that that was what I wanted to do. And they were saying no, and I was saying yes. And then one of the questions on the form was like, where do you want to be in 5 years? And I guess they wanted us to say like, oh, in a stable job, making 60,000 a year or whatever it is. But I just put, I want to feel fulfilled. And I handed that bit of paper in and I was like, I'm not going. And so that was that. But yeah, I wasn't their favourite by that point.
Interesting. There's an amazing person in our team who I had a not dissimilar conversation with when I first met them, that they sort of reflected that they'd gone to uni and like week one gone, this is not for me, and walked back out. And kind of throughout the first part of their career had felt like it was, and in a very traditional sectors had been a barrier that people, oh no, you can't do that because you haven't got a degree. And they'd mentioned it when we met them at interview, and I was like, I promise no one will ever mention that again. You're amazing for what you do and achieve. Your background's irrelevant. And I offer that perspective from having spent 8 years there, which was the right thing for me, and having a pile of debt was the right thing for me because I wasn't employable without it. And you have the flip side. So Chris White, our Director of Natural Capital, he did go to Oxbridge, and he's exactly the same view of, no, if uni's not for you, don't go. I think it just shows maturity and awareness of choice at a much earlier age than I was able to do. I think you should wear it as a badge of honour, not...
I don't know. Although that said, I was in Birmingham yesterday or the day before, and then my car broke down. So I was stuck in Birmingham for the night, which I obviously did not want to be. I'd already spent 2 days there. And so my cousin's at university there.
For avoidance of doubt, this podcast doesn't have anything against Birmingham. I quite like Birmingham, having played American football there. Go Lions.
I know, well, it was fun for 2 days whilst I was renting this really nice apartment. And then suddenly I was, you know, stuck there without a car.
Did you get to go to that cool coffee shop?
No, because you texted me too late.
Oh, sorry.
Too late.
200 degrees Birmingham, love it. There you go.
So yeah, I was stuck there and I couldn't rebook this apartment that was really nice, even though I was only staying for like one night whilst my car was fixed. And so my cousin was like, oh, it's fine, you can stay in my university dorm and I'll just stay at my girlfriend's. And I was like, oh, thank you so much, like you massively saved me. And then I discovered what university dorms are like. Oh my God, there was like mold up the bathroom wall. It was a cultural experience is what I will say. But the advantage of all of this is then what I learned is the advantage of university. Because, so my cousin is part of the life-saving club, and I don't know how much you know about competitive life-saving. It's something I did when I was younger because I used to swim competitively, and then I got so bored because you just go up and down. So then when I wanted to quit, my mom was like, oh, you shouldn't really fully quit, like find something else. So I did competitive life-saving because it is more brain-related, I think, than swimming. But anyway, so my cousin was going to the life-saving club for his university. So he obviously had to smuggle me in. Like we did the classic thing with the gates where you use the card and then like both run through. But yeah, we joined in and they've invited me to compete for them. So I'm going to be competing for the University of Birmingham.
Which you've just told an entire podcast that you're not.
That I don't care about university, yeah. I know, but whilst we were walking to the life-saving bit where we were doing like the initiative tests, we walked past this huge room of people playing badminton with their friends. And I was like, actually, like, I'm not sure I'd want to pay $9,000 a year to do it, but that looks valuable and I would really enjoy doing that. If I could play badminton with like all my friends every day, I'd be so happy.
There's another wonderful member of our team who I cannot say for legal reasons, but they their university spent the $9,000 a year on their course, and they've now left, and they're currently sneaking back in every night to play tennis on the tennis courts that are there, on the basis that if they play enough hours, it will offset the cost of their degree. You know who you are.
Yeah, so I'm tempted to do that with the university that's local to me. But having completely slated university, what I did choose to do post-Portugal in order to get into conservation was actually start a law degree. But the difference for me is that this was with the Open University, so like half the amount of debt, if that. And I can do it completely on my own terms, it's completely online, and like I can have as much or as little support as I want, but it's literally all there for me, so there's no reason not to do it. But then as a result of being with the Open University, that means I have access to like every university library in the country. So I can actually go and be a bit of a uni student if I want to. I just would rather not have a bathroom with mould in.
Nice. Okay, my uni bathroom was horrific.
Oh, I'm not sure I want to know.
Nope, 6 boys living together, not good.
Oh, yeah, I said to my cousin, I was like, how many boys are you living with? And he was like, oh, just one of them, and then there's 3 girls. I was like, what? How can anyone live like this? Not that it's necessarily a gender
It might drag
thing.
the standards up.
So you're implying that's not as bad as it could have got?
No, well, your situation, ours was pretty horrific.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty horrific, to be honest.
Yeah. So, the founding of the business?
So, yes. So I started this law degree, and then that was going quite well. And then I moved to Wales a bit randomly because I was offered an apartment there with this funny little job that I'd done in my summer of no responsibilities. I'd been like a pizza chef, and it was actually really good fun, completely random, because it was this beautiful place on the coast, and like you had the lifeguards coming in every day, and they were really cool, and just everyone was super nice. But it was just this really lovely little tiny village on the west coast of Wales. And so they offered me an apartment, and I was like, oh, all right, like I'll make pizza from a really nice sea view apartment. So I was doing that, and then I realised it's actually quite boring already. And so then this job in marketing came up for this local wool company. And again, I'm not that interested in knitting, but I really liked what they were doing in terms of sustainability, because it was all like they'd helped to craft the kind of standards that had then become accepted as organic standards for wool. So they're massively influential and very long-standing, and the founders were such incredible, lovely people. So I was like, oh, I really fancy this job. It was only part-time. I could still do the degree, still make a bit of pizza, and do marketing. Not that I knew anything about marketing was the problem. So I kind of looked into the job description and thought, yeah, I could probably do that, like, you know, create some nice pictures, write some nice text. I was kind of interested in like copywriting at the time, in addition to everything else. And so when I went for this little job, I was like, oh my gosh, I'll never be the most suitable person for this. I'll never be the most qualified. Honestly, like if they're hiring me, they're just hiring a liability. So I was like, right, how do I stand out here? So
Tell me you opened with that line, I'm just a liability, please hire me.
Not quite, but it was not far off. So I knitted a scarf for this job, and I stitched into it, please hire me. And I did a photo shoot with the scarf, and then I sent them the images of the photo shoot with like a whole campaign written out surrounding it, and was like, this is why you should hire me. Thank you.
Bravo, that's
Thank
very
you.
cool.
So I thought, even if I can't be the most qualified, I can be the most creative.
And work the hardest, I'm sure.
Perhaps, yeah. Well, I had fun. I forced my mum to model it because she was coming to visit me in Wales, and I was like, Mum, you're modelling. So it was on this beach in this beautiful village that I identified with so much, and I felt a real sense of place there, which I'd never really had before, like growing up in the southeast, just a bit boring. So yeah, and then they hired me, which is quite nice. And I loved working with them. I learnt so much because the creative director there, it was just the 2 people and then me. So there was like the lady who founded it, and then her son was a creative director, but they're both incredible people. And he was really, really cool. He was like a self-taught graphic designer prior to working for his mum. Well, I guess they worked together. But yeah, so I learnt so much, and we did some really cool things, and like, yeah, had a really positive impact on their marketing. And then following that, do you want my whole career from
Well,
there?
you're doing it rapidly,
All right,
it's good.
I guess so. Anyhow.
It's got more chapters than people who have had twice the number of years.
I
so
know, this is what I was saying when we were sat in the canteen the other day at this office.
Which was just so jarring to you.
It was so
yeah.
bizarre. And then there was this guy there who's like the new manager of something. Anyway, he's, you know, very nice, and he was introducing himself to everyone and chatting to everyone about their backgrounds, and I was obviously asking him. And so he asked about kind of how I ended up there, and so I sort of gave a rough overview of like the very long version you're now getting. And then about halfway through, my boss walked over, and she like kind of got involved with the conversation. She was like, oh, how did you get your last job? Which is where they'd kind of found me from, which was titled Media and Communications. And I was like, honestly, I don't know, because I didn't know what media meant. And that's obviously what I do like full time now. So she was a bit horrified to start with. And then she also suddenly very quickly realised my age and my lack of degree. And she honestly just looked completely shocked. And I was like, oh dear. But thankfully, I think she takes me for what I am, like fundamentally now. And I guess that's somewhat impactful, hopefully. But
I think we maybe need to give everyone a bit more shock in the world and
Yes.
get people's minds to be more open to just the art of the possible. So again, coming back to our intern campaign last year, which I was super, super proud of, the advertisement for that was built around Apple's, calling them misfits, the rebels and the crazy ones. I wanted
I just
the people
worked on
that...
an apple campaign, actually. It was really interesting because there's like so many apple varieties in the UK, but only 1 in 10 apple trees that grow. There's like 2,500. There's so many, but only one.
I mean, mine was the Apple tech firm, but Apple, the tree product, works just
I think
as well.
apples or species are so fun.
It's good. The only reason I caught that one is because otherwise I was going to get the piss ripped out of me for that, as opposed to that. Yeah.
No, I think the apple thing is really good. Have you seen the message that they give to all new starters? It's something like, we're the change, we're the future, something like that. It's a really highly impactful little few lines. I'm not sure whether it's like written in iambs.
Josh just signalled how long was left to run before we had to take a break, and Freya caught it and got slightly distracted. So that was the look away. 5 minutes until we're going to take a break.
Okay, right. So I think it might have been written in iambs, which are really interesting. That's obviously something Shakespeare did, and it's something I try to weave in throughout my writing because it just makes something sound like pretty. It sounds like something you want to hear. Yeah. So anyway.
I've never heard that turn of phrase before. It made something sound pretty. That's really cool. No.
Oh, that's what I think I say it the whole time, because
that's what we're all striving for, right?
Sometimes I am just really shallow, and I just think, actually, I just want something to look pretty and sound pretty. And sometimes that's enough, unfortunately.
Well, it makes concepts and ideas stickier with people and like emotionally connective. Yes. So we still haven't founded your business yet?
No, we're a long way off, to be honest, as in like...
Josh has just told you, you've got 5 minutes until we need to take a break, so if we can
My
found the business...
concept of time is so bad. But anyway, so I was working in this marketing job part-time, making pizza part-time, doing a law degree.
Still paddleboarding, still surfing.
Still paddleboarding, yeah, all of this, lots of mountains. And then my friends came to stay with me in Wales because I obviously had such a cool lifestyle then. And one of them, Izzy, she's really cool, and she'd just finished her, like, instead of doing A-levels, she'd done some kind of like similar but more vocational qualification that was in something to do with conservation. And then I was like, Izzy, you've got to move in with me, because the one disadvantage of all of this in Wales that was beautiful was that I was on my own, like completely. I was pretty bored and lonely. So I was like, Izzy, come move in with me, like come and live in this cool apartment with me, and you can do conservation and I'll do whatever it is I'm doing. And so I looked at the local Wildlife Trust's job page. It was the Wildlife Trust of South and West Wales. And I was like, right, Izzy, we're going to find you a job. You're going to move in with me. Anyway, unfortunately, there was nothing that really suited her, because she liked conservation in terms of like practical conservation, like let's, plant a wildflower meadow here or whatever, like on the ground. Whereas I kind of prefer the kind of like bigger policy stuff, as well as like the wider communication things. So anyway, this role wouldn't have suited her, but I was like, oh, I'll just read it anyway. Not that I knew what media was, as I said. And so I was reading through it, and like half the job description just sounded like the marketing that I was currently doing. It's just, social media marketing, copywriting type stuff. And I was like, well, I can actually somewhat say that I can do that now, in addition to knit a scarf.
Which I cannot do.
I had to YouTube it.
So you taught yourself to knit the scarf?
I also had to go and buy wool, and I had to buy knitting needles, but because it was the middle of nowhere in Wales, I had to find knitting needles in a charity shop because there wasn't a wool shop.
That's more sustainable. So.
Yeah, I know. Well, actually they were wooden, and then I was doing it so tight because I didn't know how to do the tension correctly. So I was doing it tighter and tighter and tighter, and then eventually they snapped. Anyway, so I got a second pair of knitting needles, which I actually still have, but I'm not sure I've knitted since then.
We're going to have to take a break at the second pair of knitting needles, and we'll come back for part 2. Hey guys, back for part 2. Yes, so we're just about to found your business. Really, we still got a long way to go?
Yeah, unfortunately, sorry. In like time terms, it's probably only 6 months, but I
17 jobs for you, maybe?
exactly. That's how I tend to go.
What was the genesis, though? What was the thing that made you go, now's the time I'm going?
To start a company.
Yeah.
I was offered a freelance contract. I just had a conversation with you, and you'd made it sound quite fun.
Oh, I didn't realise that was... So this is a twist for the podcast that I didn't realise I had played such... Wow.
Did you not?
No.
Well,
no,
you
no,
did.
no.
Do you want me
Awesome.
to continue with my story?
Yes, sorry, yes. You blew me away with that one.
Anyhow, so my friend, I was like, come move to Wales. She wasn't going to move to Wales. I saw this job, which would have made up. So the marketing job that I was doing was like 2 days a week. And then this one I saw advertised like 3. And I was like, excellent. If I can do this, I can get out of making pizza. So that seemed like a win for me. Anyway, so I applied. And again, I was like, I'm so unqualified for this. I didn't even know what media means. And so going into the interview, I like prepared these beautiful like handouts of example posts for the like some activity they'd asked for, but I made it really visual and really beautiful, and it was on recycled paper and everything. And so I handed them out, and I'd written notes and like annotated it so that it was all very beautiful and very technical. And they just really liked me, but also it was a very small team, and so they kind of mostly just wanted somebody who like fit in. And I tend to get on with most people. So fortunately, they were like, oh, we'll hire her. And I was like, oh, excellent. Never have to make pizza ever again. And I haven't really eaten pizza since then either. I'm actually a bit traumatized by it, but it's all good. So yeah, I then did that job for a little while. I discovered what media meant. I ended up working with Sir David Attenborough. Did all sorts of really cool stuff once I'd figured it out. And then in that kind of transition, although my job title was still media and communications, and I'd started out from such a like social media communications point of view, it then kind of evolved into like very much media. I was doing very little social media because I just really enjoy that dynamic, reactive stuff. But also it's so much relationship building as well, like working with journalists, working with reporters, correspondents, producers, whatever. I just found it so much fun compared to social media, which I didn't enjoy quite as much. So yeah, that was that. And then I was becoming a little bit dissatisfied with that, having done it for a year or so, which for me is quite a long time to do the same thing. And that's when we connected on LinkedIn, and I thought what you were doing was really interesting because a friend of mine works in recruitment for like renewable energy companies, and I was like, oh, I really want to get into renewables. I think that would be really interesting. But him and I had been having lots of conversations about the kind of carbon credit market at the same time, because he's very intelligent and very, very focused on like just environmental stuff and that kind of sector. So we had so many interesting conversations, and he was like, oh, I think carbon credits are like the one to watch. I think that's really interesting. I think it's so applicable in so many different areas. And I was like, oh, that's fascinating. I'll do some research. In doing so, I ended up adding you on LinkedIn, and then we had a little conversation. And then you agreed to speak with me, which I was so grateful for, in my half-built kitchen, because I'm also renovating a house. And so we had that brief conversation that was just like quick fire, which I realised I have to slow down in order to not make this the exact same thing.
I didn't find it particularly I just thought it was a nice conversation.
I'm always like, on to the next.
The bit I should say is, so when I was leaving uni, it was 2008, the week after the financial crisis, where nowhere was recruiting. Yeah. And there was a recruiter that I happened to stumble upon who helped me get my first job for no reason. And it was in a way that, yeah, that was the first job. And he couldn't get paid for that because the EA didn't pay recruiters. And this guy just helped me because he was nice. Yeah. And that was 20 years ago. And not quite, Abby, who tends to age me too much, like 15 years ago. And I made a rule then that if someone reached out, and this is going to kill me when this is, if someone reached out and asked for help, I would always reply, and I would try and help them in terms of kickstarting their career. So that's why I took the call.
Thanks.
So it's his fault. Thank you out there, Gareth.
Thanks
I think his name
to the
was.
recruiter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
I think there are some blessings in recruitment, and there are also some people that I'd rather not work with again.
Yeah. Right there with you.
Yeah. But yeah, so we had that brief conversation, and I remember asking about kind of starting a company, and I kind of, because to me entrepreneurialism was like this big unknown thing and like steeped in mystery and all of this, and I was like, oh, I don't feel experienced or clever enough or cool enough to be involved with that. But we spoke, and it was really interesting to me the way that you'd progressed through the Environment Agency and how like all of the skills that you'd gained and all of that kind of assisted you in starting something which you wholeheartedly, but something you wholeheartedly believed in. And that was what was important to me, because it's definitely like the passion and the story behind it that I'm infinitely more interested in. And so, yeah, that made me think, oh, I'm actually really keen on this. So around about that time, this environmental charity that I now do some work for, they were kind of looking for somebody to go on a very short term, like 3-month contract with them. And so I said to my boss, oh, is it okay if I go do that? I'll come back. And she was like, no, we can't like do this without you. It's, media and communications at that trust had become such a big thing that it was becoming a capacity issue for everyone. And so obviously removing a person from that equation isn't going to help things, which I could completely appreciate. But I was like, oh, I feel a bit stuck. There was kind of not a lot of progression or development for me there, which was really unfortunate. And so I took the 3 months as freelance, and I just gambled on that and hoped that something would appear at the end, which it has, which is nice. So yeah, that was me founding my company. But I had so much fun. Like the week that I only ended up working a week or two for that company because I was meant to give like a month's notice, but I collected up all my time off in lieu and all of my annual leave so that I could leave as quickly as possible and start my own company, because they'd been against me doing that, which wasn't so fun. And so
there's a moral in that story. If you ever work with anyone who has aspirations or goals or ambitions, help them achieve them, because if you don't, they're going anyway. And what are you doing crushing someone's dreams? So if we ever have anyone who says, I want to go do X and this is my ambition, I'll do everything I can to help them. And everyone should out there, because what's the alternative?
But I guess this is like, to an extent, I think there are limitations with being in the charity sector, is what I've completely discovered, particularly even in terms of conservation and like what can be achieved on the ground.
Part of the challenges for them will be getting permission to recruit, and actually recruiting takes months and months and months in that type of sector. Exactly. Whereas if you're more agile, you can do it in a different way. I do agree they have different challenges.
Yes, but anyway, so I was like, all right, see you later, guys. But I had so much fun in those 2 weeks because I had to set up a limited company because I already owned a house, and like as a sole trader, obviously, like any debt that you accrue is kind of like your personal responsibility. And I didn't want the house to be on the line because, I worked quite hard to buy it and I really like it. So I started a limited company, registered it all with Companies House, paid my £12 to the government. I was so pleased. And then I like created a little logo, made a little website, and I was so chuffed with it all. And then, I was like, woo, I can work with loads of people and work with as many clients as I want. Then I realised it's so hard reaching out to people. And I'd never been taught anything about business-to-business marketing. So although I'd been marketing direct to consumers for like 2 years maybe 2 years at that point, I knew nothing about reaching out to other company owners. And so I was sending them this ridiculously long email that was like, hi, I'm Freya, I own this company. This is what I do. Please reply, basically. That was essentially what it said.
So was it about that time that we spoke again?
Yeah, it must have been around then that
Because
we
you
met
were like,
Edgar
so
R.
what does this look like? Oh, no, so it was after Edgar R that you said about website and materials and stuff. And I was just like, just be more you.
Exactly,
because it was a bit generic at that point.
This is it. It was completely generic because I was still, it's back to what we were speaking about at the start really. I was still so concerned that I was like, I'm so not qualified, I'm so not experienced. Like, why would anyone hire me? Because I just didn't feel that I, was like the most sensible option. Like if somebody
Who's buying sensible?
Exactly, who's buying sensible is what I've realised. Nobody replies to me because they're like, oh, she owns a company that has a tidy logo. They reply to me because they're interested in what I have to say, or my opinions, or what I've done, or my opinions on what they've done, more importantly. So I'm certainly learning the power of differentiation, but there was also an element of me wanting to keep that personal brand actually really separate to my company, because I don't really ever want to be in a position where some whole company and like potentially employees or whatever are held up just by me, like personality wise, because I think that kind of limits you in terms of stepping away. I think it's a bit of a bottleneck. It's kind of what I've seen with other people who are very much a personality. So I didn't want to go too far down that route either. But yes, your conversation about differentiation was very helpful.
I always enjoy our chats.
Yeah.
It makes me think about things in different ways, as did that last comment, because I think differentiating person and brand, I think that ship's pretty much sailed for me with OC.
Definitely, that's the impression that I get.
But I don't know how to do it any other way.
Yeah,
and I don't want to. Like this, we were viewing a site a couple of weeks ago, and one of the agents that was showing us this site was talking about his golfing, and the other one was I can't remember what the other guy did, some kind of hobby that took him away from his family at a weekend, and said to me, "Oh, what do you do?" And I was like, "This." This is what I do all the time. I love this. When I don't do this, I'm trying to be a plausible dad and husband, but this, I'm obsessed about this. And my personality is just, I am all in. So like you early on, I had lots of different things that I tried and sort of moved around with in sports and activities and stuff. But once I like locked in on this thing that meant the world to me,
Exactly.
it's everything.
I feel like I've really found a similar thing within the environmental sector. Because, yeah, other organisations, like people in the medical field, have tried to get me to work for them. And I went into an interview and I was like, oh, I actually don't want to be here at all. Like, I obviously care and it's obviously important, but nothing really has that impact on me personally. Yeah, aside from the environmental. So I really get where you're coming from. But it's really interesting, the personal brand point, because I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective of like, oh, well, in this modern day and age when everything's digital and like, you know, you have social media influencers and you have YouTubers and all of these, and there's so much of personality and they're an individual person.
I agree. So that segues into the environment sector in a minute, but just one point on your awesome journey to starting the company. It's so interesting hearing it told through. All the successes boil down to when you were brave and went yes to something and tried to dive in and do it.
Maybe.
Yet we still come back to sort of not self-limiting belief, but rules that you think you should put on yourself. Whereas the times you've broke them have been when the really good things happened.
Exactly. I think to a small extent, like, not that I want to blame the education system for everything, but I'm kind of inclined to. School puts you in such a small box. I was in that little box of like, oh, you're good at maths, you're good at English, you need to write an essay about this, do the algebra about that. And it was just completely ridiculous. And I think that really limited what I believed and perceived.
I hated school.
And like, they would even have rules about what we could wear. Like one time, my mum still brings it up. One time I wore this like giant shirt that I'd found in a charity shop and I had like a silly belt around it and like ridiculous boots. And my form tutor told me off and was like, Freya, that's not appropriate. And I was like, how is it not? Like, how is it not appropriate? And how dare you dictate what I wear? Like, this is an expression of identity. It's so much more than just clothes. And it wasn't inappropriate, for the record, in my opinion.
It's funny, my reflection from being at school is, if anyone did anything of a point of differentiation in any way,
it's criticised.
Well, you were physically beaten for it at my school.
God.
Literally. If there was any semblance that you had difference in terms of your outlook or religion or sexuality or anything, you would have been physically hit for it. My assumption was things had got so much better when you were at school. Now, you weren't being physically assaulted for it, but you were still being pointed out for being different.
And we'd be put in like detention, which I don't understand how detention works. You just sit on your own. If I was sat on my own, I'd be plotting what I'm going to do. It would be difficult.
My idea of hell is solitary confinement. Like, no. I couldn't do 10 minutes on my own with it.
I'm sure I could, but it wouldn't be fun for anybody when I got out.
Nice. Love that. Okay, so I want to take you from your company, which I just love the story of it starting, and it is just so inspirational how you've gone, I'm going to do this. So
thanks.
Keep saying yes.
I will.
So let's talk about the environment sector in general from a marketing and a brand perspective.
Okay.
What do you think the perception of the general public is of the environment sector?
Oh, I don't know, because honestly, I'm so out of touch with my own generation because they're at university. Although I do think we all kind of perceive that the environment's quite important. But I think that's, again, well, this is maybe a positive coming out of education. But I distinctly remember my first kind of touch point with the climate as a concept was GCSE geography. And I had this teacher called Mr. Paul Street.
It's most people's, I think, is GCSE geography, yeah.
But honestly, I hated everything about school except GCSE geography. And Mr. Paul Street was excellent. He'd done all sorts of interesting things. Shout out to Mr. Street. I don't even have him on LinkedIn. I don't have any contact with him. I have to go and hunt him down to tell him about
Chapters of life, you move on to the next one.
I know, but I always like to thank people. That's something that's actually really important to me.
When you write your first book, send him a signed copy back and say
I'm not
thanks.
sure I'm going to be writing a book anytime soon. Oh my gosh, I went to an author event the other night though, and there were loads of women there and a few men. And so they were all chatting to me as if I was an author as well. They were all authors. I was not an author. And they all just assumed that I wrote romance just because I was female. And I was like, oh no, I actually didn't write anything at all, but it wouldn't be romance, just to say, if it was anything. Nothing against romance writers, but it's just not my thing. And yeah, that was interesting.
If there's any romance writers out there that also happen to go to university for a huge amount of time, you've just alienated that audience. Right?
I know, I'm so sorry.
Joking. So the reason I asked about the question about the environment
Yes.
sector is my worry, and the thing we're trying to push back against a lot is
Yeah.
the perception that it is the purview of the retiree and the volunteer, and you're
Yeah.
planting a tree on a Sunday and that's it. And I think if that's what people view and see the environment as, we're not going to get the most excitable, creative, talented people wanting to get into the environment sector.
Yeah.
So that's why we've tried to do a lot more around videography and photography and pared back branding to black and white and let the environment be the colour it brings, because other organisations have a child's drawing of a tree or...
Yeah, I know, it's a bit infantilising.
Exactly.
But I do think there's interest and merit in the fact that it's the older generation who seem to be doing this kind of like on the ground plant a tree.
Yeah.
Because actually it's not
And we
really to
need it. It's
impact
not to
them.
criticise that at all.
No,
you
no,
know.
but my point is like these older people, it's actually like they've obviously got to a point in their life where they've recognised actually this is important, and even if it's taken them 80 years to get there, and we're all on that journey. But I just think it's so interesting because like planting a tree, like fundamentally, maybe this is a bit rude, but maybe they're going to be dead before
it's
the
for
tree
someone
does
else.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's entirely selfless, and I think so many other generations need to recognise that they don't even need to be selfless. They just need to save the planet, like for them.
Yes, please be selfish.
So be
and
selfish.
save the planet.
Save the planet.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, moving that topic along, what are some of the brands and companies that you do like what they're doing from a sustainability and environmental
Okay,
perspective?
right. So I've been thinking about this all day, and the answer is there's nothing that's not perfect. That is perfect.
No.
Can we just cut that out?
No, we'll just keep rolling. Nothing that's perfect. Right?
Okay, there's nothing that's perfect is the
Yeah.
problem. There's a caveat with everything. And so whilst I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking really hard because I was like, why can't I just name one? Why don't I just say Patagonia? Why don't I just say Oxygen
I
Conservation?
mean, you've kind of, I wasn't digging for OC, but you've kind of voted with your attire with Patagonia, right?
Well, the thing is, I think Patagonia is great. It's a really cool company. And I love companies that were founded out of a desire to change something
Yep.
rather than a desire to make money, because I identify with that a lot more. And I think it's a lot more impactful. And it's so much better for storytelling and all of these things. So I do like Patagonia. I kind of prefer Finisterre because they're UK based. But I was just down for the weekend and this happened to be what I put on. Anyhow, so in terms of like companies and voices that I massively respect, there's so many people that I really respect, and there's so many people doing such positive things, and they're all incredible, and we need everyone, as we've said before. But I think the ones who I find the most inspiring are the kind of small, localised, massively underrepresented little ones. So like where I am on the west coast of Wales, there's a company called Aber Food Surplus, the town's called Aber. And they basically are on a mission to combat climate change through like food waste. So they go around all the few local supermarkets there are and collect up all the food waste, and then like create community events where they use that food, and they have a community garden. And I just think that's so impactful on such a small scale. Like they've got not very much money to do it. They're completely reliant on grants. They have very few members of staff, but what they're doing is completely incredible. And I don't know how well it would scale. I don't know if the whole of the UK could take on board that company, but so many different towns could have their version of, and I think that would have a huge impact. Or like there's a conservation project literally just up the road from there called the Pumlimon project, which is kind of rewilding, but we don't use the phrase rewilding because it's Wales, and they're doing incredible
Do you want to explain
stuff. Yes, so in Wales, not that I'm from Wales, but I have spent so much time there now, and I feel like I really identify with that part of the world, even though I'm not from there. But yeah, it's kind of addressing the farming narrative in Wales is really interesting, and it's something that I'm really working on through media, which is going quite well, to be honest. It's quite nice when people are like, oh, Freya, I saw this that you did on TV and it made me think about this. I'm like, oh, excellent. But yeah, so in Wales, because so much of it is farmland and it's largely sheep farming, obviously, even as the stereotype goes. And so the concept of taking that farmland potentially from farmers, like acquiring that land, and then doing something with it that's not its traditional use and is in theory not producing as much, even though the majority of, lamb produced by Wales doesn't go to Welsh people. So typically we try not to use the phrase rewilding because it was wild and it is wild in so many ways. So we try to say nature's restoration, and sometimes we say wilding instead. I prefer nature's restoration. But yeah, rewilding is a really bit of a hot topic everywhere.
It varies across the country, doesn't it?
It's, there's so much nuance, and that's why I think these localised projects and localised media, I just think there's so much power in it that's completely untapped, really. Anyway,
Perfect.
that's
And
my
we need
opinion.
to take a short break at that. We are now into the rarefied air of a third part to a podcast
So
because Freya,
exciting, 'cause
so
I
interesting.
apparently waffle a lot.
Self-diagnosed waffling.
Self-waffling.
Yeah, here we go.
Self-taught waffle,
Thank
exactly.
you,
Not
Josh.
university
Interjection
taught
from the
waffle.
director's chair. Nice. For those of you who haven't heard Josh's voice before, that is Josh behind the camera. Can you say hello, mate?
Hello, mate.
Nice.
Hello.
Nice. That's his sort of catchphrase is hello, mate.
Oh, right. That's
Yeah.
really funny.
And we'll do it to famous people as well. It's,
Oh, amazing. I'm
yeah.
going to start emailing you with that. Hello, mate.
Josh is now celebrating. So those of you who have stuck to a part 3, you're getting a lot of behind the lens
Behind the
type stuff here.
scenes.
Okay, so final few questions for us
Go
to
for it.
focus on. Ideal future clients or collaborations for you?
Okay,
If you
so
had a wish
I
list.
thought that was an interesting one as well, because I used to not be very good about thinking like really far in advance. I was always very much.
I don't think that's unusual. I don't think a long way ahead
Okay.
either. I think most people
I
say
always
they
saw
do
it
and
as a huge
retrospectively.
flaw. Oh, okay.
Like people who say, oh, 5 or 10 year plans, they're all
Who
lying.
knows what's going on then?
They get somewhere and go, oh yes, my plan was to do this. I've
Okay.
not met anyone who had a genuine,
Oh, right.
except maybe medical doctors who have gone, because you have to have such a regimented
Yeah.
5 years at uni, 2 years of qualification.
Oh, maybe
Those
that's,
people
like,
maybe, but outside
easier.
of that. I'm not-
Okay, that's fine. I'll feel less bad about it then. But yeah, so as a result, I kind of never really envisioned any like in particular. I kind of wanted to get into renewables, as I said. I really like the really technical stuff and the stuff where I have to learn something. Like I love having to read through loads of reports and like find old files and pick out the figures and stuff like that and try to make it digestible. I find that so
We
interesting.
literally had a partner in a law firm sat there 2 hours ago saying verbatim what you just
Oh,
described.
I know. I think I messaged him on LinkedIn as well.
I'm sure you did,
I
probably
probably
because of
did.
me.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. I need to apologise to anyone I know out there who Freya's now trying to become friends with, because apparently she's just stealing
I
my
just
entire
like
LinkedIn.
making friends with people, and you seem to have a really good network of people. So I just think,
Very kind.
yeah, well, hopefully it's all positive. But anyway, so yes, I really like technical stuff, and that's why I wanted to get into renewables, and that was my plan. And so when I first had my company, I reached out to like millions of renewable companies, and I was like, I'm Freya, I have this company, super corporate and very serious, and you should hire me. And obviously not a single one replied, and I was like, oh, obviously something went wrong there. So yeah, I kind of gave up on the renewables in that sense. And then obviously I'm now more in conservation with like environmental charities. So I kind of reflected the other day and realised I actually am working with the type of people that would have been my goal
Nice.
if I'd known what my goal was. So that's really cool. But as I mentioned earlier, like I kind of really just want to uplift the whole sector through media. I think that would be so cool, like really raise the profile of environmental stuff. Like editors shouldn't be saying, oh, actually, no, we don't want to talk about this environmental thing. I think that's ridiculous. I think we need to be talking about it the whole time, because it's going to impact us in so many ways in the future. And the problem is, it's not just kind of as is often perceived. The consequences of environmental degradation aren't just over there. Like so often they're just down the road. I attended this event that's called a climate fresque. I don't know if you've heard of it. Oh, it's really cool. It's from France, and the idea is to basically explain in a kind of like team-based way the really scienciness behind climate change, and like the way that like cause and consequence is what they call it. And so you have to put all of these cards into a line of like this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And there's all sorts of things at the end, like climate refugees and like famine and war and all of these awful things. But at the start, there's stuff that you could even argue is like not related to human intervention. It's like the natural greenhouse effect or whatever. And in between, there's everything else. It's like rising sea levels or like greenhouse gas emissions or whatever. And so it's really interesting. And I attended this event and we were talking, and I was obviously the youngest, but there were people not much older than me. And so I thought they'd have a similar experience from school, where I think we actually did have somewhat of a slightly more nuanced view towards kind of the whole them and us situation with the environment. But in the climate refugee square, we were discussing that, and everyone was kind of addressing it as like, oh, it's the people who are losing their homes in like this country, or it's the people who are starving so they can't grow crops in this country. And I was like, oh, but this little town up the coast, Fairbourne, it's being allowed to flood naturally. That's like, it's a managed retreat. That's what's being done because it's not of high economic value. So these people are going to lose their homes. So they're climate refugees. And their houses flood every year. So they're climate refugees. And the other participants of this climate fest just couldn't appreciate this. And they were like, no, that's happening elsewhere. I was like, no, it's here. Like, it's quite obvious, in my opinion, that it's here. And it means that we can't just live in this little bubble anymore where we're like, oh, it's all fine. Like, oh, I'll, use my 10 recycling bins, as Rishi Sunak said, or whatever it was. Use my 10 recycling bins and it'll all be okay. Because actually there's so much more to it. Like, there's so much more change that needs to happen and so much more that needs to be done. So, yes, I wish it wasn't such a them and us thing.
So we're about to have an election in the next 12 months that has had the battle line of the environment drawn smack down the middle.
Well and truly, with net zero, oh my God.
Which, ironically, is government policy, even though we now, if we want to criticise people, say they're net zero zealots. So they're zealots for government policy, and that's a criticism. Great job, Rishi.
Was this off the back of the RSPB comment that was like, Rishi Sunak's a liar?
Yeah.
And then it was criticised because they called him out.
I was so
insane.
So unhappy they pulled it back.
They didn't on the England one. I think they deleted it off the UK account, but I think on the England one it's still there.
So I actually sent a letter to members of the RSPB and said, if the comms person who did this gets into trouble, please tell them to send me their CV.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I had a similar conversation with a few people.
Because I was they are liars.
Yeah.
Like, they're lying.
Well and truly.
Yeah, in every single which way. Yeah. So if we take that battle line of the environment as this election, this is how I think it's going to play out, and I'd love your counter to this. So I think it's 50-50 whether we're going to see a Tory government again or a Labour one. My hope is that it being the battle line this election, next election, it is the definitive, whoever can do the most for the environment is going to take it, because you almost have to have it so presented as an issue that the next generation that come along to vote, those people that can't vote yet, and in the next 5 years, the Greta Thunberg generation that are coming, the ones that had posters of Greta on their wall, are going to vote for whichever party puts the environment front and centre. Is that blind hope, or...?
That's where I'm identifying, because I think I'm only a year or so older than Greta. And this will be my first election that I voted in. And although to be honest, I stay quite far removed from like wider politics, it just got too heavy for me.
Yeah.
I used to kind of want to change the world in a super humanitarian way, and I realised I actually didn't have the energy to do anything by the time
more change in place.
So I can affect so much more change by focusing on one thing that really matters to me and really matters to everyone really in just different ways. So yeah, I do hope that it's done on environmental rules, and I think nutrient neutrality and net zero, to name just a few from the last 2 weeks.
Oil fields, sewage in all our rivers and lakes, and the Lake District turning into an actual toilet.
Yeah, and Wales as well. Yeah. It was just discovered like 11 sewage plants in Wales have been putting sewage into the sea for an accumulated 1,000 days.
That's low on some of the water companies in other parts of the country. It's just horrific. I'm going to bring us back to the hope, though. So you and I are both of minded that if it's not this one,
at least it will be the next.
Perfect. And that's how we'll end up. We're going to end up with hope that the next generation are coming. They're here. I'm going to do my damnedest to save enough of the world that there's something left for you and my kids and stuff like that. Freya, thank you so much for coming for what is a brilliant conversation, and your journey to starting your business and saying yes to opportunities and breaking those presumptions of what we shouldn't do is what's going to make the difference. So it's been a pleasure having you in the shoot room. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.
Bye. I don't know which one to wave at.
Whichever one you like. All of them.
Bye.